Previously on TREX Labs, we've talked about drones, we've talked about security and privacy stuff related to devices, and we've talked about product design and other behind-the-scenes TREX stuff. But in this video, we're going to bring it all together. This video is going to be more than a mere product review, but mostly I am talking about this device right here. This is the Radiomaster Pocket, which is a drone controller specifically for FPV drones, and it's incredibly affordable at about $60 at the time of this recording, and it's just really well designed. I have to say that I don't know enough about FPV flying or all the different drone components, radios, and to the intricacies of this niche hobby. Is it still a hobby? If you watch Drone Wars episode 4, you'll see that it's potentially more than just a hobby. But this is a piece of hobby equipment, and yet it is really well designed. I think there's some fascinating lessons that we can learn from how this device was developed and put together. But I also recommend it as a drone controller. For $60, you can get started with something that is both an excellent trainer in The Sims, but also comes with a bunch of different radio modules and is even expandable so that you can run different radio modules if you get into drones that have different radio receivers, different digital protocols, etc. So very expandable device, and that's kind of where I want to start. So this device has some considerable smarts to it, but not in some of the ways that you might expect. I want to compare this device, which is real, and you can buy it right now, and possibly should if you have any interest in FPV flying, but I want to compare it to an imaginary device over here. This is the Radiomaster Pocket, and this is the Darkwing 2000.
Darkwing 2000. Darkwing 2000. Darkwing 2000. Let's get dangerous.
It is the terror that flaps by night and the rest of a motto that you can't remember. It's an artificial product just because I want to have it for, straw man purposes. Not that this is a bad product, but for specific purposes, this one is superior. Let me explain. The Radiomaster Pocket is a pretty bare bones device without sacrificing any functionality whatsoever. So this thing, if you look at the screen, is really, really basic as far as the display goes. It has all the buttons and switches that you might need, and it has really nice gimbals. It also charges over USB-C, and it stores everything on a micro SD slot. It has Bluetooth so that you can connect it to your computer if you want to use it as a controller for drone simulators like Liftoff. All in all, it has basically all the features that you would need, in addition to the internal 2.4 gigahertz radio and built-in antenna, which rotates and folds depending on whether you're storing it using horizontal or vertically polarized receivers. Yeah, it has basically all the features that you want, and it has some things that I wasn't really thinking about because I'm not really a FPV drone pilot. For example, it has a voice. As you do different things with some of your controls, you will get vocal confirmation of them.
Minimum trim reached. Trim center.
This is really important if you are, wearing a headset and not able to see exactly what you're doing with your hands. That's part of the reason that there's more of an emphasis on tactile buttons, rotary devices here for inputting different things. There's a haptic feedback that vibrates it, and then there's that voice. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use this without looking at it, which is important. This feels like a piece of professional equipment when it comes to the feature sets, but in a very affordable package and done very simply. Now let's compare it to the Darkwing 2000 over here. Yes, putting 2000 in the name of a product makes you know that it's very futuristic and capable. The Darkwing 2000 goes about bringing you a high level of features at a completely different way. It has a totally different mentality, a totally different philosophy. Instead of bare bones features, it is a device that has an Android brain and an Android screen. That means you get a beautiful responsive touchscreen instead of these tactile buttons over here. It has the voice, but it gets that from Google, so that it's really, really nice. An AI voice that speaks all the commands that you want it to, and it runs apps. And I want to point out that in many ways this is not a bad thing. Some of you may remember that I was flying the Skydio drone with an Android tablet with tactile buttons and gimbals. And so there's definitely a place for this. If you want to be able to run a bunch of apps and a bunch of devices on your particular controller, Android is kind of a good way to go. We also talked about that in our graphene video. But if you want something that is immediately responsive, if you want something that talks directly to an FPV drone, if you want something that has the same level of features but a lower level of dependencies, this is going to be a little bit better. And specifically for FPV drones, this is better thought out. The idiot who designed the Darkwing 2000 as an FPV controller forgot that you're going to be wearing a visor, and so you're not going to be able to see any of those touchscreen controls. That makes it almost impossible to actually know whether you got the thing just right. But then there's kind of a deeper consideration. Even though the Darkwing 2000 looks amazing, well, I think it'll look amazing. I haven't actually designed it yet. I'm just confident that when I finish shooting this video, I'll find the time to make a 3D model that just sits over here and looks nice. Even though it looks amazing, it suffers from a significant design flaw for people who are interested in simplicity and reliability. Because it is running Android, that means that it needs to have a much more sophisticated, powerful computer brain, and there's some baggage that comes with that. The technology stack for this particular device over here is complicated. It's probably not going to have a Qualcomm SoC, because those are just too expensive, but it'll have something from MediaTek or Rockchip, like this one does. And then on top of that, there's going to need to be a Linux kernel. And then on top of that, there's going to need to be some drivers. And then on top of that, there's going to be Android itself, an entire operating system with some pretty significant space constraints. So we're going to need like 3 or 4 gigabytes of RAM and a fairly hefty processor. And then on top of that, we're going to need to run a bunch of background services to do all the stuff that a drone controller might need. And then on top of that, we're going to need to run the apps that actually do the translation layer, that do all the drone communication and run all the protocols over, hopefully, some kind of inbuilt 2.4 gigahertz radio. And then if not, something that's kind of added on through a fake USB port or a COM port inside of the thing that hopefully never malfunctions, because the drivers are always good. There's a lot of technology happening here in this stack, and some of it is really good. The Darkwing 2000 can actually play FPV simulators on board without connecting it to a computer. You can get real-time mapping information. There's a whole bunch of advantages to having the extra stuff built in. And yet there are those significant downsides. This big technology stack here requires more expensive components, requires more battery power, and some of these things are going to require connection to the cloud constantly. And everything that's in here, every single line of code that you get in here, is an extra place where difficulties, incompatibilities, bugs, or even malware could hit you. This is all attack surface here for enemies who might want to attack this thing. Meanwhile, over here we have our Radiomaster Pocket, not to be confused with the Retroid Pocket that sits kind of halfway in the middle. This thing is ridiculously simple. The technology stack over here looks something like this: an off-the-shelf microprocessor with a whole bunch of electronic components like switches and buttons wired directly to it, then the firmware, and then I guess it's just your scripts and your files that are sitting on this SD card right here. So this is much simpler. The processing power inside of this device is nothing compared to the Darkwing 2000. But because it doesn't need to run this entire technology stack, you actually get really good battery life and really good response times. Those instantaneous responses that you want as you are piloting your FPV drone around, whether it's in the simulator or real life, matter quite a bit. And since there are fewer lines of code that need to be run, there are fewer synchronization errors, there's less abstraction, and there's less translation that is required. This is just going to be a better, more dependable, more reliable device. And it has the advantage of, well, basically no attack structure. Yes, there's a Bluetooth radio in here and you can connect it to computers. Yes, the radio that's inside of here is 2.4 gigahertz, and so it's going to deal with, the same interference that regular Wi-Fi gets, but this just isn't as clunky, hackable, and it's not dependent on a whole bunch of stuff that this over here will be. This doesn't have any of those Linux kernel or Android vulnerabilities that get discovered by security breachers all the time and then need patches over here. And then every time you patch part of this technology stack over here, there's always the possibility that you break something in the middle. So in a world where almost every device is getting smarter by moving in this direction, I find it really encouraging to see cool devices that are over here on this direction. Powerful, but elegantly simple, sophisticated without all these extra bells and whistles. So let's talk just a little bit about this device and some of the design considerations that I think make it really cool. So on the face, it is just ergonomically nice and it works well, and the thumbsticks are a little short for FPV flying, but I'm not an expert, so I like having something that I can blame my poor piloting skills on. And yeah, I mean, it's really not that bad. There's a couple of little minor things that make this device feel a little bit cheaper, but everything feels pretty solid. A couple of these buttons and switches here feel a little sticky, but for the finesse of actual flying, you're relying on gimbals that have Hall effect sensors, and they're incredibly adjustable by screwdriver from the back, and you can dial in your trim and do a whole bunch of things with the profiles inside of the firmware. And all of the data that you create, all the profiles for your different drones or your different simulators or your different whatevers, can be saved to this micro SD card, which means you can back them up and save them and transfer them to other compatible devices here. I think it's just really solid and simple. Powerful, but simple at the same time. And I love that everything on here is really non-proprietary. I don't know how open source all of the different parts of these are, because I just don't understand the FPV drone space very well yet. But I do know that on the back here we have the ability to plug in a bunch of different RF modules from people besides Radiomaster. So it's compatible with, I don't know about competitor, but different manufacturers' radio equipment. And there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do with the device. You got USB port up front that lets you go straight into a computer. You got a charging port that's USB on the back, so you can do both at the same time. You've got a way to plug in a trainer plug to another one, and then on the back you even have a headphone jack, so that when you're wearing your goggles and you want to be able to hear the voice inputs and the timers and your battery readings and stuff like that, but you want to do it stealthily and quietly, headphone jack. I mean, come on. The Radiomaster Pocket has a headphone jack. Ancient phones used to have headphone jacks. New, fancy, premium phones that are giant and have lots of space, no headphone jacks. I don't get it. Now, one of the things that you would get on something like the Darkwing 2000 is potentially more ports. The Radiomaster Pocket has the headphone jack, it has the micro SD port, it has USB-C charging, but it also has HDMI out and a bunch more buttons. So one of the things that you could have with this magical all-in-one controller over here is HDMI out for goggles, and it can combine a bunch more features. But again, now you're running everything through the bottleneck that is this thing's security and battery restrictions. If you don't want to run all of your vision and all of your telemetry and all of your control through a single device and a single radio, you're kind of stuck with that over here. This gives you a few more options. So yeah, as you think about various devices, whether you're a designer or whether you are a consumer, I'd like us to go back to thinking a little bit more about very specific devices that do very specific functions at the cost of not doing everything. I think that there is a lot of value there in a lot of different situations. Maybe the situation is combat, but maybe the situation is just a really demanding hobby where lightning quick reflexes are required and you're flying a drone that costs you a fair amount of money through some really thick undergrowth, and you would like this thing to be tuned specifically for that job and not do other stuff. Maybe you want a GPS device that doesn't have a whole bunch of extra features and a whole bunch of extra requirements and a whole bunch of extra battery drain going on, and it connects to the cloud all the time, and it needs updates, and the updates break other updates, and then there's malware and hacks that happen on the back end, and the whole thing is being managed by companies that you don't fully trust. Maybe you would just prefer a Garmin GPS device, something that has no bells and whistles, just the maps and a GPS receiver, and it just works. And because it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, batteries last forever. That's another thing that I love about the Radiomaster Pocket is it comes with no batteries. If you pop off these rubber things here, you can see where we install the batteries. It takes a regular 18650s, which you probably own, you probably should own. You pop them in there and there's a recharging circuit that runs off of the USB-C. But if the batteries start to die, you get new rechargeable 18650s. If you find yourself amassing a large fleet of drones and you want to store more profiles, you get a different micro SD card. The huge amount of options that this thing gives you by not locking you into a bunch of proprietary formats is really nice. That's another thing that I would like to see more product designers get into. Even Garmin. Garmin, actually, they do a reasonable job with different formats and different capabilities, but I think everybody could move more this way. I have to say there's something clever about the way that these battery compartments work, because you're going to be gripping this device. It's made out of this nice slippery, clear, see-through material, but you want to have some rubber pads on the back, and you're also going to want to have something that closes up these battery compartments, and so you can kill two birds with one stone by making the rubbery pads the battery compartment covers. Also, when you unscrew the control sticks from the gimbals, there's this nice little slot in the rubber back that holds them steady. Now the gimbals are safely able to be stowed. It's not 100% pocketable, in my pockets anyway, but it certainly travels really nicely in a bag. It comes apart and you can mess around with some of the internals, adjust the gimbals, replace the antenna, because that's probably the most fragile part of the entire thing. And there's a ton of stuff that you can adjust inside of the menus really simply and really easily, all with switches. No touchscreen nonsense. I just realized this thing actually does have games, including an FPV simulator. So yeah, we can actually practice our flying on this device. No drone required. And absolutely, no Android required. So yeah, so this is a infinitely superior device. Whoa, okay, come on. We're missing a ton of these targets here. Oh, this is embarrassing. But yeah. So much for Android here. This is the way forward, you guys. Minus 23 points. I actually really like this product, not only because I think that it's fun to see this trend of simple and powerful and no reliance and dependencies on other people's code, other people's hardware, other people's stuff to the level that most smart devices are going, but also because it's really usable even for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. It's really powerful for a lot of the different stuff that I do sort of begin to understand, and it's sturdy enough and affordable enough that even my kids are able to use this to practice in liftoff. I'm enjoying getting more into the FPV game, trying to understand things better, and this is a fantastic gateway device. If you have any interest in this space, $60 for the device. You should already have 18650s, but that's probably $10 if you don't have them. And then 10 or 20 bucks for Liftoff, which I believe is the best flight simulator that you can learn on at the moment. And now I would like some input from you guys. It's very easy for me to do rambly, nerdy deep dives into products. If you're interested in that, let me know. We can do more of that here on the channel. I can also invent new products that don't actually exist, either to prove a point by strawmanning something, or to, develop something that maybe actually should potentially exist in the future. So if you'd like to see more of that, let me know. And then give me some ideas of things that need designing. But I do want to sum up the video by saying this. As you look at electronic devices to do important and useful things, I do want you to consider this admittedly false dichotomy between smart devices with massive dependencies on a large technology stack and all the vulnerabilities that come with it, and devices that are a bit more specific. Dedicated devices with the simpler technology stack are more intriguing to me and potentially more valuable to you. And you can make them without skimping on any of the actual features that a person needs. The more I look at this concept here, which I technically haven't designed yet, the more I wish that I hadn't gone into so much detail about how awesome it's going to look.
Darkwing 2000.